So I'm from Michigan originally, a town called Pontiac, which is just outside of Detroit. And I lived there for the first 17 years of my life. And it was a pretty decent childhood. I, had both my parents there. They both worked for General Motors. And it was a pretty decent middle class life. And then I'd say around the time that I was maybe 11 or 12, things started getting a bit rocky because General Motors itself was going through a lot of difficult times. And so then they started doing a bunch of layoffs. At different times, both my parents got laid off. My parents got divorced actually when I was around 12 years old. So that was kind of tricky to navigate for me, especially because I went to a Christian school and it was like very conservatively Christian. And so I was a bit embarrassed even about my parents being divorced. It was also around the time when I was trying to come to grips with my sexuality and what that would mean in the context of that kind of Christian background and upbringing. Because aside from going to the Christian school, I also went to church a lot. At that time, I was kind of on this path to become a minister as well at church. So there were a lot of things I was trying to kind of reconcile and make sense of. I never really felt comfortable or like I had a place in my town. It was predominantly Black, but I went to, as I said, that Christian school. And so I was always kind of made to feel like I didn't belong. Now that I'm older, I can see it in context. And I think, the kids in my town were facing a lot of things much worse than I was. But it was kind of the sense of, I was different. And so that was called out a lot. So in my family, everyone kind of always said, we Black people need to stick together and work together and all that. But then I never really felt like I had a place in the Black community growing up. And so I kind of shied away from being around a lot of Black people because I felt like there was always a time when I was going to be attacked. So that was kind of my life. I didn't really know what was going to come next for me in life. I thought maybe I'd stay in Michigan, maybe go to the University of Michigan one day if things went well and, just kind of live life there. But when I was 16, I had the chance to go to a youth leadership conference and really enjoyed it, met people from all over the state. And then through that, I was selected to go to the national conference that they had in Washington, D.C., and that one also had participants from other countries too. And I'd never really been in that kind of environment before with so many people from all over the place. And I really enjoyed the experience. And when it was over, I got a chance to meet someone who was affiliated with that organization. He was just speaking to someone else, and I overheard him talking about living abroad and studying with people from all over the world. And it sounded really interesting and fascinating to me. So I pulled him aside and asked him what he was talking about. And he told me about a group of schools, these UWC schools, United World Colleges. And so it sounded super intriguing to me, an amazing opportunity to meet people and also, quite frankly, to kind of get out of my current circumstances as well and see the world. But that sounded to me like things that, super accomplished people did. And so I wasn't really confident that I would get a spot. But I got into the UWCs and they said I was going to Singapore. And so I was super excited about that. But then I had to go and look on a map to find out where it was because I had no idea where Singapore was. And school started, I think, in August. And then, September happened. I remember I was in the computer room, looking at my email or something like that. And then someone said that, plane hit the, one of the towers. And, I thought it was kind of a joke at first. And then it was like, oh, this is not a joke. And people were super supportive at school for sure. But the next day when I went to class, some of my classmates from around the world also brought some things to my attention about the United States that I wasn't aware of. And so, whether that be kind of supporting certain groups in the past and me getting an understanding that the world isn't so black and white and that things are not, there's not just always the good guys and the bad guys. And it made the world instantly a lot more complicated. When I was in Singapore, we had a chance to put on a conflict management conference for Indian and Pakistani students over the Kashmir dispute. The one thing that really stuck out is when we had the students bring their textbooks. So the students from India brought theirs and the students from Pakistan brought theirs, and just seeing how the same history was explained and what was left out and what was embellished. And they too were quite shocked to say, oh, I didn't know this. No one ever told me about that. Or that's just characterized in a completely different way. And it was very eye-opening for me too, because it made me think about my own history as well. What I had learned in school, what I hadn't learned in school, what was kind of glorified, what was made to seem like it was, an absolute must. The fact that, at least at that time, there was a very narrow focus of American history. There is, a certain lens through which it was told. There wasn't a lot of kind of examination of kind of the minority experience or the minority contributions to American society at that time. Another really big and important kind of moment in Singapore was toward the end of the first year. We had an opportunity to meet people from different religions. So I met, practitioners of Buddhism and of Judaism and of Islam and of course of Christianity, and atheists as well. And that was also very new for me and quite jarring. And there were, I'd say, a lot more similarities than differences and kind of what people believe. And so then it got me to thinking very critically as well about my own spirituality and my own beliefs and where things fit in and what kind of life I wanted to live. And then, this is still a time when I was grappling with my sexuality as well and thinking, this is how I was created, and how does this work then with these concepts of religion? Does what I was taught as a child still ring true to me or not? And so that as well was a huge thing for me, because Christianity, at least as it was taught to me, was the bedrock of my life, and it informed all of my decisions in life. And so it was something I didn't even want to question. I was firstly kind of taught not to question it. But I also didn't want to question it because it would literally mean kind of reassembling all of my life. So that was a very difficult period. It was kind of planting the seed for me to do some deep work and figure out what I believed and wanted to believe and all of that. So there were many, many things in Singapore. Nothing short of a transformative experience for me. And as I came to the end of my time in Singapore, I, of course, like everyone else, was thinking about what's next and what school to go to and all of that. And as I said before, I was thinking maybe University of Michigan is where I would end up. But I spoke to the mentor who had kind of told me about the UWCs, and he said, well, why don't you cast the net a little bit broader than that and see maybe what else might come of it. And I was like, okay, sure, I can do that. I wasn't confident at all, but I applied to a bunch of schools that I thought were way above my league, punching above my weight, and then sat back and waited to get all of the acceptances or rejections as they were. And it was quite surprising. I got a lot more acceptances than I had expected, and to schools that I had never expected to get acceptances to. And it was a moment when I thought to myself, I can kind of remember the vignette even now of thinking, oh, maybe I am smart. And yeah, that was it was an important experience for me. That it gave me a lot of confidence. There were really two schools I was deciding between, and I ended up going to Penn, which I'm super happy about, and had a great time there. But the decision was very tricky, actually, because there was another school that I was thinking about going to. So I got accepted to Harvard, and at first didn't get a lot of financial aid, and so it was kind of off of the table. But they actually came back and offered me more financial aid to go. Almost a kind of a full ride situation to go. And then to me, all of the barriers to going had kind of fallen away. But for reasons that I still don't completely understand, my mentor at the time heavily dissuaded my mother from encouraging me to go. And without my kind of mother's kind of support and backing, me going would have been really, really difficult. And so I ended up turning that opportunity down and going to Penn. And for a number of years after, I kind of questioned, anytime something didn't go exactly right in my life, I would always say, well, what would have happened if I had gone to Harvard instead? So that happened, and that was a little bit difficult to get over. But as I said, I had a great time at Penn, and I met some fantastic people there, some of whom are still my very, very close friends to this day. It was there that I really started learning a lot about the way the world works. So I took political science, for example, because I thought at the time I might want to do something in politics. And the first summer, I took a class called Who Gets Elected and Why. And after I took that class, I decided politics was not for me. So I left that alone. But it was very eye-opening and revealing to have that experience. The other kind of important, or one of many important things about Penn was that I was able to continue my Japanese studies. So I started studying Japanese in Singapore. I was always kind of questioning, why is there so much apologizing going on? Like, why in the language don't you just say kind of directly what you mean? Why is there kind of all this kind of beating around the bush and things? And so I kind of wanted to learn more about the country and all of that. And so Penn had a great program for studying Japan and all things about it. And so I learned a lot. And then my junior year, I had a chance to study in Japan. I went to Kyoto and studied there for a year. Got to take all kinds of classes, economics, women's studies, protests in Japan. So when I was first learning about Japan, it seemed like things were, very straightforward, and all Japanese people were kind of the same way, and all very peaceful and meek and mild, and all these things. But then, through my studies here, I learned actually, so there have been these periods of uprising in Japan and protests in Japan, and there are minorities in Japan, and there is discrimination in Japan amongst Japanese people and all kinds of things. And so there too, I got a much more nuanced view of what life was like in Japan. And after my year was over, I thought, this amazing country, met a lot of friends, really enjoyed it, would love to go back someday, but I don't know how that's going to work. And I ended up getting an internship at a bank, and thought it was going to be in New York. I did my last year in college, and then was speaking with the bank and got my job in New York. And then they said all of a sudden, oh, hey, would you be interested in maybe going in Japan? Because we've got a spot open there. And so jumped off and went to Japan, and started working in a bank, and about 80% of my job was in Japanese. So I went from studying it academically to needing to use it for my livelihood. And it was very much a kind of up or out culture. So if you couldn't cope, you'd have to find another job. And so all of a sudden it went from, just kind of having this language that's around and fun to kind of speak to, well, I got to do this. Otherwise I'm going to be on the street here. So it was a rough first year for sure. The other thing is that my internship was in equity sales and trading. And at the bank I was at the time, that was their most profitable segment. And I didn't realize that at the time because I didn't really know anything about banks. I kind of fell into working for one. And so I said to them at the end of the internship, oh, can you actually give me a job in another division, please? Because I felt that they should just be doling out jobs to me at that time. And actually, they were kind enough to find something for me. And it was in an operations role. And what I discovered after joining the bank is that, at least at that time, there was a very strong hierarchy, kind of front, middle, and back office. And so I had gone from the kind of preeminent group in the front office on the investment bank side to probably what most people would consider close to the bottom. And when I recognized that, I really had a bit of a crisis moment because I thought I'd kind of worked my whole life to get to a place where I can be in one of these kind of competitive fields. And now I've just completely messed it up. And so I was in a bit of panic mode trying to basically get back to where I had left. And I spent, after my first kind of 6 or 8 months in the role, and I kind of got my feet wet and understood what I was doing, I was going around to all the senior people in fixed income, because that was the floor that I sat on at the time, and basically saying, what do I need to do to kind of get in the front office here? And one of the senior people in the department said to me, oh, you should go over and, talk to this guy. He's making a ton of money. The group is probably going to expand. And if he likes you, maybe that's the place to go. And so I spent a lot of time over at his desk and learning about what they did. And ultimately I didn't get the job, and I was really disappointed about that. The interesting thing is, if you fast forward a few years into the future, that guy is the only person who was convicted for LIBOR manipulation. And he just recently got out of jail. So in some ways, it probably worked out, at least for me, that I didn't end up getting that job. But at the time, I was really down about that. Eventually, I got put on the new graduate scheme because I wasn't on that scheme when I first got in the role. And so they said, okay, you can go to the new graduate program the following year. So my second year at the bank, I got sent to London. They rolled out the red carpet, the whole thing. And I thought, okay, great. This is like the first step to kind of getting back to where I wanted to go. And then one day we hear Lehman's gone bankrupt while we're in London. And then we hear Citi's almost bankrupt, and Goldman might be in trouble, and Morgan Stanley might be in trouble. And the bank I was at the time, as well, had lost billions and billions and billions of dollars. And so then there was panic amongst all of the new grads. What does this mean for us? Do we have a place? Very stressful. So London wasn't exactly as exciting as I wanted to be, or maybe it was exciting, but not for the reasons I thought it was going to be. So after that was over, I went back to Japan and was just hoping to survive at that point. It was really kind of keeping my head down, trying to do my work and not cause any problems. And I saw people all around me getting fired. People around my age, who had gone on the same training program with me, having their boss standing over them while they put their belongings in a cardboard box so they could take it out. And that was still the charitable way. Some of my colleagues went to lunch, and then when they came back, they couldn't buzz themselves back in. And I remember one day I went to lunch and then tried to get back in, and my pass wasn't working. And so then I freaked out, and I called my boss and I said, does this mean I'm done? And she said, no, you're not done. There's a problem somewhere. It's completely, let me get it fixed. So I didn't get fired, but I thought I did. And it was really, really stressful. And that continued for months and months and months. For me personally, I was thankful to have a job, but it felt again like just as I was making traction, just as I was getting myself back to where I thought I should have been, that there's this huge downturn. And then, front office job was completely off the table. Just keeping any job that was, well paying was a difficult thing. And so I had to kind of put things on hold. So I thought, well, what can I do? And because the bank I was working for at the time was a Swiss bank, I thought, well, why not try to get closer to Switzerland? Because that's where the big decision makers are. And so I looked internally for jobs, and then I found a job in London that was in the business management department, and I got the job. And so off I went to London. And so I spent 2 years there working in business development, or in the kind of COO's office. And I still was kind of hoping that things would turn around. So I spoke to someone senior because I spoke to them all the time. I was in meetings with them all the time. And in a very polite English way, he basically said that, there's no way in hell that you have a chance of that. And so I thought, okay, maybe things are not going to work out here. And so I thought, well, what am I going to do now? So I thought about maybe applying to a different bank. I thought about maybe applying to consulting roles. I thought about maybe going back to school. And I applied to school in the end. So I applied for JD programs and MBA programs. And I kept the universe pretty small. I applied to, I think, 4 schools, got rejected from Harvard for both, got rejected from Yale for both, got rejected from Penn for both. And then I had an interview with the University of Michigan. And then I got accepted to both the JD and the MBA, and they were going to give me a full scholarship. So not even a loan, a full scholarship to go to both. But the longer I thought about it, something wasn't quite sitting right for me. And I knew in my heart of hearts that it wasn't where I wanted to go. And so I turned it down. And the next year I applied again for Harvard, Yale, and Penn. So I got rejected from Penn again, got rejected from Yale again, got rejected from Harvard Business School. And then I got put on the waiting list for Harvard Law School. And waiting lists at schools like that are kind of like purgatory. And the chances of getting off of them is like so small to the point where no one really takes that seriously. It's kind of like a consolation prize. Like you're the first loser or something like that. And so then I was like, all right, back to the drawing board then. Let me see what else I can do. So I started applying to a ton of things. And then one day I get a phone call, and it is the dean of admissions from Harvard Law School. And she says, congratulations, you've been accepted. And because I was off the waiting list, it meant that I didn't have a ton of time. I had maybe 2 months or so to pack up my life in London and get to campus. And so that's what I did. Went there, and it was like a dream come true because, as I mentioned, I wanted to go to Harvard for undergrad. I got in and then didn't go. And rightly or wrongly, probably wrongly, I kind of blamed everything that didn't go my way in life after that on making that decision. And so then I felt like, okay, now I have redeemed myself. I'm in. Now I've got my chance to do this. I don't think anything that I had done before that had really prepared me for law school. It was a level of kind of rigor that I hadn't seen before. The amount of work required and the level of detail required was far beyond anything I had done before. And I was around a group of really ambitious people. It's interesting because people always ask me all the time, you must have been going to school with geniuses. And I'd say, Not really. I probably know in my life, I've probably met maybe 3 or 4 people who I consider to be either a genius or on the verge of genius. Most of the people who I've met who've been really impressive have just been really, really hard workers, actually, which was heartening to me because it allowed me to see you don't have to be a genius to do great things in the world. I made it through those 3 years, and I ended up getting an internship at my first choice law firm. And when I graduated, I ended up working there as an associate and was super excited because they had a very, very strong New York practice. And they also had a very, very strong Tokyo practice. And I thought, at some point I'd love to come back to Tokyo. And I started working there and felt like it was my time to prove myself. I think as a Black man, it has always been something that I've carried around with me, rightly or wrongly, that I have to always prove that I belong, that I'm smart enough to be there, that I'm not like a diversity hire. And so the first 2 years of my life in particular at that firm, it was just kind of morning to night, weekends, holidays, canceled, attendance at weddings, all the things, dedicated basically all my time to the firm and trying to do a good job and not make a mistake and not get a bad reputation. And it was stressful. And it wasn't just me, all the other associates who I was working with, they were in the same boat and everyone was hustling and trying to prove that they belonged there too. And so therefore that was the standard really, working until 10, 11, 12 at night and waking up again at 5 or 6 in the morning because you're on a cross-border deal and things might have come in overnight was part and parcel for the job. So I did that for 2 years and really wanted to be someone who was looked at as on the path to being a good lawyer. And one day there was an event at the office that the office was throwing, and the head of the firm came up to me and he said, "Oh, hi, Brandon." And so first I was instantly taken back because my class there were over 100 people in it. So I knew there was no way that he knew everyone's name, and him knowing my name was kind of a scary thing. And so I said hello to him, and he said, "Oh, I've heard a lot of really positive things about you, that things are going really well." And that was super important to me to hear that, because it felt to me then like I belong here and I can do this work and I'm good at this. I'm just as good at this as anyone else. And I felt super validated because of that. It was really the first time since I started working that I was able to kind of take my foot off the gas and just sit back and think about where I had arrived. And it was an exhilarating feeling for a while. But then I thought, is this actually where I want to be? And that was a bit of not a dangerous thing to think, but it was a jarring thing to think, because on the one hand, I had worked for so long to try to be there. But if I was completely honest with myself, I kind of knew maybe this is not exactly where I want to be long term. And so I spent a few weeks really just thinking, who do I want to be? What kind of life do I want to live? What am I good at? What do I want to do? And what kept coming back to me was people. I really loved talking with people and hearing what was going on with them and getting into the murk of their problems with them. And I thought, well, what kind of job is that? I would sit around and talk to people. And so then, psychology, psychiatry came up, and I thought to myself, there's no way I'm going to law school. I'm not going to now either go to medical school or go get a master's degree in social work or something like that. So, kept looking. And then from time to time, this thing called coaching would keep popping up. And didn't really know what it was, but it sounded like hocus pocus to me. And so I wasn't really sure about it. But I came across a New York Times article, And it was quite an old article, at least 10 years old. Maybe it was older than that. And it said that there was a man who was, being a coach, and he was getting paid, I want to say $500 an hour. And as I say, this was quite some time ago. And so that was intriguing. So I thought, okay, well, someone's paying for this. So I sought the guy out. I found his email address, emailed him. He, responded, and then we had a call. He was gracious enough to do that. And I kind of heard about his story, which was really one of personal transformation. And then one of his coworkers at a coffee shop he was working at the time said, "Hey, I've noticed something's really changed in you. Could you speak to my husband? Because he's always really stressed." And the guy said, "Sure, I'll speak to your husband." And so he spoke to the husband, and, lo and behold, the husband is a hedge fund guy. And so, he started working with a bunch of people in hedge funds. And so my thought was, okay, well, hedge fund people aren't going to spend a bunch of money on something that they think is not adding value. And so maybe there's something here. Someone is finding it worth it to spend that kind of money on a coach. And so I thought, okay, well, maybe this is worth investing some time in to see what it's like. And I signed up for a coaching course. And it was a transformational experience doing that. I learned so much about myself through that process. So much about what was going on inside of me that I hadn't thought about before, or I had kind of suppressed. And I just had a lot more clarity after that. And it was a long process for me because I was doing it while I was working at the law firm. After my second year in New York, I got sent to Tokyo to work here. And so made the move here. And it became clear that I couldn't focus on finishing the course at the firm I was at. And so I made a move to a firm that was a little bit more balanced as far as time was concerned. And even then, it still took another 2 years. So I spent 3.5, maybe almost 4 years all in total, getting through the coaching program. And after I finished it, I thought, okay, that's great. Maybe now I'm going to start being a coach. And I realized that unlike everything I'd done in my life up to that point, there wasn't some coaching company that was coming for on-campus recruiting where I could just get a job after it. So I have to become an entrepreneur, basically, which was not something I had ever planned on doing or really thought that seriously about. And so I was completely and fully unprepared for it. But decided after COVID to kind of make that leap and do that. So I had kind of announced to my law firm that, I had intended on leaving, and the managing partner of the Tokyo office said, "Well, wait a minute, why don't we have a conversation about this, and maybe you can stick around part-time. We can, try it out for a little while and see how it goes. And if it doesn't work out, then we part ways." And actually, it's worked out really, really well, better than I could have thought. So I am coaching now, and I am working still on a contract basis in law. And as you know, because we're here right now, I also teach at Rikkyo University. So those are my kind of three things going on. And so I'm kind of bouncing from thing to thing, working with students at one day, working on a multi-billion-dollar transaction another, and then kind of helping people to figure out what they want out of life and how to get it at other times. So it's a real interesting kind of mix of things I do right now.
I want to go back to UWC mentor a little bit more too.
Uh-huh.
At least in the beginning, it sounds like he was the one who encouraged you to punch higher, encouraging you to apply for these schools that you thought they were out of reach. Had you not met him, what kind of trajectory your life would have been?
That's a good question. Almost certainly, without some other intervention at some point, I don't see why I ever would have left. There was every reason to stay, and it required a ton of escape velocity to get out of there. I just never had someone in my life both believe in me and have the tools to help me. So my mother always believed in me, but a lot of it at the time was like, oh, okay, Mom, of course you're going to say that I'm this and that because you're my, like, what else are you going to say? So I always discounted a lot of what she had to say in that regard. And I think my mother always lamented not trying harder and not achieving more, not having someone who would push her to do that. And so she spent a lot of time when I was growing up and a lot of resources really trying to put me in the best school she could afford, trying to put me in the best program she could afford. And she would often say to me, you know, I messed up and I don't want you to mess up like me. And when she didn't put it that, I said, you're not going to mess up. Like that was her, always kind of like her mantra, but she was very open and honest about that with me. So she was always encouraging me. And so I had that foundation there, but I didn't have a lot of confidence because I didn't see really people around me who were going off and doing big things. That was always someone else. That's what it looked like to me. Someone else, someone off, someone different than me.
But at the same time, it's interesting because it was you that you pulled him aside, right? It was you that made that initial contact with this person.
Yeah.
So in a sense, you made it happen.
I guess that's true.
I'm sure you thought about it a lot too, but why do you think he dissuaded your mother from supporting you? You're going to Harvard.
So there was a reason given, and I can barely remember what the reason was because at least to me at the time, it didn't make sense. I really don't know. After going there, I can't see how my going there as an undergrad would have been a negative thing for me. As I said, I had a very positive experience at Penn, and in some ways, it's very good actually, because one of my cousins said something to me once, which is I think is very true. It gives me another network to have actually. So the alumni networks at the schools I've gone to, both of them are really, really strong. And so you have kind of access to a whole different group of people by virtue of going to the school. And so, if I had gone to Harvard for both undergrad and for grad school, actually, I wouldn't have that same access to the network.
Does he know now that you did end up going to Harvard and got your JD?
That's a good question. I don't think I ever told him. We're connected on Facebook, but in the past kind of 10 or so years, maybe more, 15 years, I haven't really used it that much. But I think there probably were a few pictures from graduation up there, so he probably knows.
But he didn't mention anything about it? Like, how dare you?
No, he didn't say anything about how dare you, certainly. Yeah.
I read your bio on a Whittaker coaching website, and you kept it brief, and you said you somehow ended up in finance. Is there any story there?
Yeah, there's a story there. So I was a Japanese studies and political science major at Penn and just started thinking about what to do. And there was one kind of member of my family who had worked in finance. So I spoke to my dad before I even got to Japan. And this is when I was talking about my internship and wanting to work in Japan. And he said, you should speak to this cousin of yours. He worked in Wall Street or something like that. So he might be able to help you. And he worked in Japan for a little while. And so he was the one who introduced me to the managing partner of the Tokyo office of the law firm that I worked at for the summer for a few weeks. So when it got to kind of the end of the first semester studying in Kyoto, I reached out to him and just said, hey, I don't really know what I'm doing here. And do you have any ideas about maybe what I could do? This is my profile. And he said, what you need to do is work in investment banking, Brandon. Just very cut and dry to the point. And I was like, I don't know anything about investment banking at all. So it's not that difficult, Brandon. You can just learn it. And I said, okay. So I applied for a program and got accepted, and then, ended up in equity sales and trading at UBS as a result of that. Just kind of started doing this internship because, my cousin thought it would be a good idea. So that's kind of how it happened.
Is this the same cousin who told you that having multiple networks would be better?
Yeah, it's the same one. Yeah. He actually,
a billionaire?
I don't know. I don't know what his net worth is now. But I would definitely say that, he has done exceptionally well. He invited me out to his place in the Hamptons, and I'd never been in the Hamptons before. I kind of heard about it vaguely, and that was again one of these experiences. Like, oh, okay, this is what people do. I was just asking him about his career and what he was wanting to do and all that, and he said, "Oh, I want to start working for myself and creating." Something that I can have long term rather than just kind of supporting other people to make their dreams come true. And, over the course of, I guess it's maybe been 15 years or so since we had that conversation, things have just really grown for him. And at first, it's what I would probably have described as a mid-market private equity firm. But now, they've done some major acquisitions. So, yeah, he's done exceptionally well. But it's not like he started off being exceptionally wealthy. I mean, had a pretty solid middle class upbringing, but not like super wealthy. And really worked hard and developed this. And so, there aren't a lot of Black guys in the U.S. doing what he's doing. There are a few, but there are not many. And so he always has kind of lived large in my mind. I always kind of think about him because he has just like achieved some phenomenal things. And I was like, oh, Frank is just like at another level. Like, it's always like, all right, what would Frank do in this situation? This is like just the next level. This is like someone who is really playing in the real big leagues. Like, I would walk down the street with him in New York and multiple people would stop us on the street and be like, oh, hey, I haven't seen you. Like, can we get together? Like, and he just has this electric personality. And when you speak to him, it's just kind of like, it's just you and him. And like, he doesn't care about anything else. Just a phenomenal human being in so many ways. And so, now as I know more about the world and just having to navigate so many things, and, as you start getting up to that level, there's politics involved and all sorts of things, and just be able to do that and still kind of keep that kind of fundamental essence. This is just a guy that I've like known for like my whole life. And then he is, really now, a luminary in finance. So yeah, he's played large in my life.
Singapore, America, London. Why Japan?
Japan is kind of where I came of age in a way. I got here as a professional when I was 23. So it was, aside from a little bit of time I spent in New York prior to coming, my first real experience having graduated and then really starting my career. And so I learned a lot about what it meant to be a professional here in this context, and also what it meant to be an adult here in this context. It's almost like feelings of home in an interesting way. Japan is a place that, and Tokyo in particular, I should say, is a place where things can feel quite cold, and it can be difficult to develop really strong friendships and things here. Um, and obviously I'm not Japanese. I don't look Japanese. And so, therefore it's like you're never like fully accepted. I put so much time and energy and effort into learning about this country and learning this language and learning the history and how to do things the right way and everything. But like, then it wasn't reciprocated. Like I always kind of felt like an outsider. But then at some point it just kind of became like, well, yeah, I'm an outsider in a way, and that's okay. And I've got my corners, of this town. And I've got my people here, and it's comfortable and an easy place to live. This is not a place to kind of rebel against the system. Like that doesn't work well here to get things done. That doesn't mean you have to agree with everything, but people always say this, but I think it's very true. This whole shokunin kind of idea where you're kind of building something over time, and also that things can change, but they need to change slowly, very slowly. And so it's okay to point out things that might need to change, but there's a way of doing that will be accepted, and it's not blasting it in front of people's faces. That doesn't tend to go over well. It's very much first showing that you understand the way things are done and why it's done that way, right? And having respect for that. And then offering observations about things, just observations, without putting any moral judgment on them, and understanding kind of where Japan is going and the difficulties Japan is facing, and linking that to those observations. And then, maybe having a conversation about, these are things that I've seen that work, or, this might be an interesting idea. And planting the seed there and giving that time to germinate over time. I find that approach works way, way better. This is just not the kind of country that appreciates it when people want to, come from the top and start yelling from the mountaintop. I mean, people say this kind of stuff all the time, but really a lot of those expectations about how things should be, you have to leave those at the door. And first understand what is and appreciate what is. And for a lot of things that would be considered, not to be convenient or that are not efficient, there's usually a reason for them. And they almost always link up to something that's really enjoyable about this country, actually. A lot of the inconvenience actually in some ways makes things kind of special here. And so how do you preserve those things that are good and then make things more efficient as well? Because efficiency just for efficiency's sake is also not great either. And on the other side too of just, mentioning where I mentioned before that oftentimes it takes time with Japanese people to kind of develop relationships. Once you have developed that relationship, then it's kind of like, oh, this is cool. So like, this is my place, and like knows me here. And like, it's like, oh, well, how many money that's fine. Just pay me next time kind of thing. Or, oh, here's some like extra this or that, or, or, oh, let me introduce you to this person that like is actually doing exactly the thing you want to do. You just feel like you kind of, you get in. I have been using, Mitsui Fudosan basically since I started living in Ikebukuro, because my roommate at the time, he knew someone from there, and we used him. And then I used the same guy again when I moved to Akasaka years later. And then I left Japan. And then I came back and I used the same guy again, like 10 years later. And then when it was time to move to Karuizawa, I said to him, hey, is there somewhere in the network, or can you recommend like a company to do it? And yeah, he recommended, one of their subsidiaries out there. And two things happened. One, when we moved out of the place in Akasaka, I've never heard of anyone getting all of their shikikin back when they move out, all of their deposit money. There's always something's broken, or, I need to fix this or whatever. So when I got the deposit back, the only money that was deducted was the cleaning fee. There was no fee for anything else, which is like almost unheard of. And I want to believe that part of that is like this relationship building over time. And the same was true of building the house. So there was already like this introduction done by the time I got there. They all knew who I was and they worked really hard. Now, would they have worked really hard anyway? Yeah, I think so. But having that extra kind of connection helped. And as I say, I was living in Ikebukuro in 2000. Moved in 2007, started building the house in 2000, or talking about building the house in 2019. So it's over a decade of relationship being built. But this is a relationship country, right? And as a foreigner in Japan, having Japanese people who will vouch for you is like super important in my experience anyway. London was great. Under the right circumstances, wouldn't mind living there again, I think. And, you know, the US is the land of my birth. And for all the criticism I can hurl at the place, I still do believe it is the land of opportunity in many ways. And I'm not sure if I had been raised somewhere else, if life would have gone how it's gone. You know, I got a scholarship to go and study in Singapore, and that scholarship was paid in full by an American. All of the scholarships for the US are paid by the same guy. You know, there was some serious thought going into moving back to the US in 2019. Then COVID hit, and then the response to COVID started, which to me was less than optimal, to put it mildly. And then, you know, all the racial stuff started happening. And, you know, things like that have been going on my whole life, but something this time really hit me very hard about it. But the one that really hit me the hardest, strangely, was there was this Harvard bird watcher incident in Central Park. And so this guy was out watching the birds, and then this lady was out there with her dog, and it wasn't leashed up. And then the guy said to her, hey, you got to put your dog on a leash. And then basically she ended up calling the police and saying that she felt threatened and all of this, and come save her. And the police came, and I mean, he had filmed it all, and it all ended up working out. She ended up losing her job, and on and on. But if he hadn't filmed it, if it had happened a little differently, it could have ended in a very different way. And I just saw myself in that guy, because New York was a city I lived in. Central Park was a park that I walked. And, you know, for all of my, you know, accomplishments at the end of the day, that could have still been me. They wouldn't protect me from that. And that really hit me hard. And I just thought, is this a country that I want to live in? Is this a country that respects and cares about me? Is this a country that sees the value I can provide and celebrates that? And I was feeling like no at that time. And so, yeah, decided instead to stay in Japan and to build a house in Karuizawa instead.
Let's get into that. So you live in Karuizawa.
Yeah.
You just said you built a house there.
Yeah. So the first thought was to just buy a property there and fix it up, and then to live there. And then, you know, we went around and started looking at all the various properties that were available. And there was always something maybe not in the right area, or, you know, not quite the right look or whatever. Eventually found some that were okay, and asked, okay, well, how much do you think it would cost to fix this up? And then the price to fix it up, they said, would be way higher than the purchase price. And so then it felt like, well, if it's going to cost that much, might as well just build from scratch and get, you know, exactly what we want to do. And we just so happened to find a piece of land. Ultimately, ended up going with a company that was kind of in between being a housemaker and being an architect. And they came back with a pretty compelling design for the place, which we liked. And then we spent probably about a year, many, many hours of life going through all kinds of details. So room by room, designing everything from the ground up. Karuizawa is To me, a fairly unique place in Japan. So I first went there with my then boyfriend and now husband before I left to go to London. Strangely reminded me of home in Michigan because where I lived in Michigan too, there's tons of nature around, and we had a house and a yard and had a car, and all of that was stuff that I really liked. And then just kind of getting around and seeing the types of people who were there and saying, oh, wow, there's a lot of international people here, a lot of people who have interest in the world here, a lot of people who are doing similar things to what I'm doing here. So maybe this can be like a cool place to meet people. And just discovering over time, yeah, people who maybe in Tokyo I'd never speak to, but there things are a little bit slower and the town's smaller and people reach out and they ask questions. And so I just kind of thought, yeah, this is kind of cool. It's got kind of a small town feel, but with a lot of the conveniences of a much bigger place and still being close enough. And then, yeah, of course, being able to have a house and having a decent amount of land to have a yard and being able to open up the door and then have your own private space outside. Really longed for that, missed having that, which I had when I was a kid growing up.
Anything you want to touch on, like as far as your career with Rikkyo University?
I never thought in a million years that I would be a professor of anything. I have a former colleague and also kind of former teacher in some ways, who is a professor at Kyoto. And he asked me one day, hey, would you be interested in maybe teaching a class? And I said, sure, I can come in and teach a class, or come in, I say. It was taught on Zoom because we were in the middle of a pandemic at the time. And so I did that, and he was tag teaming that class with someone else. And so his co-professor reached out at some point because someone from Rikkyo had reached out to him and said, oh, we need someone to come in and teach, and we want someone who has practical experience. And so then I reached out, had a conversation with her, had one more conversation, and then I had the job. And they're like, great to have you on board, and yoroshiku. They gave me, what the title of the class was, basically, and then it was left to me. It was a new global program that they were setting up in the kind of Department of Law and Politics. And the idea was the course would be taught in English and to help students to be able to work in an international environment and speak confidently about matters that require kind of a legal knowledge, but also just kind of being able to speak at a business standard when doing international business. And so it's been great, actually, working with them and seeing them grow over the semesters that I've been here. I think one of the big challenges here is getting the students to the international standard. And that may be surprising to a lot of people because most people hear, oh, Japan and the education system is really great. Their high school students are like way above where high school students are in the US. And that in many ways is true. But the Japanese educational system focuses a lot on getting the right answer and having a lot of knowledge, having a lot of facts that can be recalled. And while that's good, I think one of the things that I have seen where there's some chances for improvement going forward is helping Japanese students to think critically about things, to have the courage to speak up, to speak their minds and not have to care about what other people think. Of course, doing it in a respectful way, but being willing to stand on their own. Also self-esteem, which was one that I was not expecting. But I've had a lot of students here at Rikkyo, which is, one of the top universities in Japan, say, oh, I don't think I'm smart enough to do X, Y, Z. I also teach a course now at KO, and I studied abroad for a semester at University of Tokyo. And I've seen the students there, and some of the students there face the same thing. So it's not just here, but here in particular, I think the students sometimes feel like, oh, well, I'm not a KO student. I'm not a Waseda student. I'm not a Todai student. I'm I'm doing okay, but I can't really achieve the same level. I'm not as smart as they are. And so I spend quite a lot of time with my students just trying to reassure them that, if you try, you can do this stuff. That I have been to those schools. I teach in one of those schools, and I know what the standard is there. And that's not, to disparage those schools in any way. That's to say, I know what the standard is there. I know what the standard is here. And really what's separating you in many ways is your belief in yourself. You're a human being. They're human beings. You can do this if you really want it. Right? And, I try to bring a lot of that kind of, to the extent I can, best in class thinking to them, leverage my experiences at top schools, both studying there and working there, and just the people I've known in my networks too. Working at the bank, I've worked with people from all those top schools. I've worked with people from all the top schools around the world. So I know what the competition is like. I know what's required to, quote unquote, succeed in life. And so I try to help them to see that you can do this. The question really is, are you willing to do what it takes to do this? A lot of them say mine is one of the harder and more challenging courses that they start off with. And then they continue to say that in my harder courses too. But I really feel like that's what I'm here to do, to help them to see what's it like when you graduate. What's the level that's expected? If you really want to do this stuff, this is what you need to do. And if you don't want to do it, that's okay too. Let's figure out what you really want to do. And then when you figure that out, what's required to get there, right? So you really use these 4 years to figure out who you are as a person, what you want to achieve, and what you need to make it happen so that they can get out in the world and be spending more time living life on their terms and how they want to live it rather than feeling like they're just being pushed along by it. So that's not a lot about law, actually. I found that, law is kind of the vehicle for all these other things because, like ChatGPT and all these other things that are coming, the acquisition of knowledge is going to get easier and easier. So in some ways, it's about the other things.
So for wrap up, I have a series of questions. First question, what do you miss about Detroit? Home in general or America?
Ooh, that's a big question.
Do you miss?
Oh, Detroit. That's an interesting one.
Or Pontiac, to be exact.
Yeah,
right?
Pontiac is
Pontiac.
to be exact. Yeah. So I miss this. I mean, it's kind of with me at all times. So I won't say I miss per se, but one of the things I feel really fond of is my young childhood. Because it was, my parents had a fairly acrimonious falling out. But when I was a child, I really felt like I was surrounded by love all the time. And even though my parents worked a lot and weren't with me all the time, I never felt alone. Like there was the person who was looking after me was basically like a family member as well. So she was there when I'd get out from school. One of my parents would be there in the evening and another one would be there when I'd wake up in the morning. And then, we'd spend time together on the weekends or whatever. But it wasn't like I had all of their time all the time or we all sat down for dinner every night or anything like that. But I always felt loved and cared for. And that's something I'm really thankful for, that they did that. I don't know if they did that consciously or not, but it really worked for me. And so that's something I still definitely feel there and cherish very much from that place. The thing about kind of America more broadly that I miss is that kind of gusto, can do, make the impossible happen spirit. In particular, New York. I lived there for 2 years. So I don't know if I can really call myself a New Yorker properly, but there is just such an energy and dynamism in that town, and everyone, no matter what they're doing, is trying to be the best, trying to make it, trying to shift the paradigm. And whenever I'm there, I just feel like I get swept up in that energy. I try to get back to New York once a year and just kind of get my like injection of that to kind of keep me like, yeah, I gotta keep pushing forward and trying new things and, getting up when I get knocked down kind of thing.
What's your favorite Japanese word or phrase?
Bijireiku. And so that's probably a strange thing to hear. And the reason why is because when I was finishing up college, I took this kind of high-level Japanese class, and I was reading this book about the United Nations and politics and things. And I always wanted to, I had this thing where like I wanted like perfect Japanese and wanted to be able to express myself at the same level in Japanese as I did in English. And so I like heard this word bijireiku, and it was like used in the context of like kind of political rhetoric and stuff. And so like I wanted to like use it in a sentence. I feel like at that time I was always like, oh, you learn this new word, you want to use it in a sentence. And then I like used it. And then the lady said back to me, like, why are you talking about a busy lake? I just like, so like first it's not like a phrase that people use at all. And then like I like tried to use it. I have this like big build up and have this like really eloquent sentence. And then she's like, why are you a busy lake? And so I don't know. I just like, it's something like stuck in my mind. So it's just like a weird story that that's kind of humorous and stuck with me. It means kind of like flowery language, or kind of like, the kind of promises that politicians make about things. So yeah. Also is related to the part about being a politician that I don't particularly enjoy.
What's your favorite Japanese food or restaurant?
Favorite restaurant is Shirosaka. It's a place in Nakasaka, and it's a kappo ryori place, and I love kappo ryori to begin with. But I really like that place because it had just opened when we moved back to Akasaka. So this was around 2017, I guess. Just starting out, and found the place. It was near to our place, could walk there in a few minutes. The food was amazing. And used to go there a fair amount, especially at the beginning. And then during COVID, tried to go and support. But yeah, when they were just not really a known place. And then now, they got a Michelin star and everything. And so.
What's your craziest story you attained while living in Japan?
I mean, it's not that crazy, but we were living in Ikebukuro, just over there, and with one of my, really good friends, we just had like a home party, and he also cooked all the time because his parents used to own a restaurant, so he cooked from the time he was young, cooked really, really well. So I invited all these people from all these different places, from fashion, people in finance, consulting, so a wide group of people. It started, I can't remember what time, maybe at like 7 p.m. or something. And, one of the things we were always like lauding is like, oh, Japanese buildings, they're built really well, really, really like soundproof and all this. And so people came over, and then somehow like more and more people like somehow found out about this party, and it became like the party to go to. And so like in our apartment unit, there must have been like 35 or 40 people in there. And it was like one of the most like wildest and raucous parties, like probably of my life. And there's just like, people are just like, copious amounts of alcohol being consumed, all the rest of this. And as I say, it started around 7. I think the last person went home at like maybe 5:30 in the morning, like saw the sun go up. People are like, kicking off their like, socks and like dancing on the floor. It was just like this crazy party. And then the next day, we go on with life and go to the mailbox, and there's this handwritten letter in there. And it must have been like 6 pages long. And it like chronicled like the whole evening. It was kind of like, at this time, you could hear some high-pitched noises. And at this time, there were these deep, undulating sounds. And just like the whole thing was chronicled like this. No complaints all night. Nothing at all. And it was just like, we heard all of this, and it would be great if you could take this into consideration going forward. So it was like, it's like the most like passive aggressive note of all time. I should ask my roommate if he still has that note. But it just like, it was just such a like perfect Japan experience. It's just like so much gaman in that, like not going to say anything, not going to cause a scene, not going to call it out at all. But I am going to let it be known that like, this was an experience that I did not like, but I will also say that in a way where that is not directly conveyed. And I'm going to put it in a nice letter, nice stationery, and pass it over. It's just like, such a Japan kind of experience.
Written in Japanese.
Written in Japanese, yes.
You read the whole thing?
Yeah.
Any parting message or advice for the fellow gaijin?
Maybe just speaking from my experience in life, and this is probably more for the younger gaijin in particular, those who are thinking, oh, Japan is super cool, and this is, because Japan's having a moment right now, and there's lots of like YouTubers and influencers talking about Japan right now, is to take your time here and to enjoy it. I spent a lot of my younger years rushing things and really trying to make them happen faster and get to the next stage faster. That sometimes I didn't fully appreciate all the great things that were happening around me. The other thing I'll say is learn Japanese and learn it as well as you can, because that is like, if it's like a video game, it like unlocks these hidden levels. Kind of, and you're not going to get like the best stuff until you get there. Because as you learn the language, you just learn so much more about the culture. You learn so much more about what's going on around you. And it just makes the experience so much deeper and richer. And I will say that, maybe this is not the most fantastic thing, but there's still places in Japan, especially in Tokyo, where it's hard to go to them if you don't speak Japanese.
One last segment. Pay it forward. Do you know what you're getting?
No.
Do you know who the previous guest was?
No.
Okay. Well, I'm glad that your craziest story in Japan involved alcohol, because he's a wine importer and he has his own shops. He's got two. He's got one in Meguro and one in Sashikoyama. So he's paying it forward. It's called The Better Half.
That's amazing.
Let's see if we can, there you go. Yeah. It's from New Zealand. And he handpicked this wine. And in his words, this is what's going to put his kids through college.
Okay.
So I think that's his main product from his shop. So, yeah. Do you drink wine?
Absolutely.
All
Absolutely. Right. It's amazing. It's good. This will definitely be getting consumed.
His name is Andrew, and his company is called Colonial Trade. Do you know a lot about wine? Or?
I should know more.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I started kind of collecting is too strong of a word, I think, to say. But when I was living in London, my one of my flatmates would get wine every summer from his uncle. And I was like, oh, that's pretty cool. And he's like, oh, Brandon, you should get a wine cellar. And I was like, what are you talking? I can't like afford getting a wine cellar, dude. Like, he's like, oh, no, you can like work through Berry Brothers and Rudd, and they can, set it up for you. And so you can invest over time and get one. And so I started doing that when I was living in London. And so, yeah, I don't have a ton, but I probably have like 600 or 700 bottles of wine. I wouldn't say I'm a wine connoisseur by any means, but I'm, trying to grow my knowledge over time.